I want to begin by thanking the Jenerosity Foundation for making this evening possible. And I would also like to take a moment to dedicate this evening to the life and loving memory of Tommy Batat. Tommy was passionate about politics and the people who present and interpret it. Tommy and Jennifer first sponsored Jim Lair here at the JCCSF, last year Dan Rather, and now Maureen Dowd. We are deeply grateful for the commitment and generosity to the JCCSF and for bringing events like tonight to our community. Please join me in thanking them. You will have an opportunity to ask questions of Maureen Dowd following her talk this evening. Please raise your hand and our staff will come to you with a microphone. Please wait for the mic to come to you. This event will be watched live online, and listeners of our broadcast on public radio BINA program at noon on KLW 91.7 on Thursdays. And now for this evening's program. Maureen Dowd, winner of the 1999 Pulitzer Prize for Distinguished Commentary, became a columnist at the New York Times op-ed page in 1995, after having served as a correspondent in the paper's Washington bureau since 1986. She has covered 4 presidential campaigns and served as White House correspondent. She joined the Times as a Metropolitan reporter in 1983, and prior to that began her career in 1974 as an editorial assistant for the Washington Star, where she later became a sports columnist and feature writer. When the Star closed in 1981, she went on to Time. According to the New York Magazine, Maureen has always been an equal opportunity provocateur, winning a Pulitzer for evisceration of the Clinton administration, and between poking the first President Bush with a stick and eating his son for breakfast. She labeled Donald Rumsfeld menopausal and said that Al Gore is so feminized that he's practically lactating. She is the lone female on Murderer's Row, as the Columnist office in Washington bureau are called. She refers to President Obama as Spock and Sir Lecture a lot. And it is believed that George Bush privately called her the Cobra. She is also the author of the 2005 book, Are Men Necessary? When Sexes Collide. It is my pleasure, and please join me in welcoming Maureen Dowd to the JCCSF.
Hi. Can you guys hear me? Okay. I'm very nervous, so be gentle. At Barack Obama's 2008 inauguration, Washington was swept up in a magical mood. For the first time, the city where I was born seemed truly integrated, the races mingling together in infectious joy. We were on the cusp of an era that promised to move beyond racism and extreme partisanship, beyond bullying and bellicosity. It would be a leap into modernity, a time, as our handsome smarty pants new president promised, when government would be cool again and work again, and when blue and red would mingle together in a lovely purple hue. I decided to give a party the night before the inauguration. This would later become known as the worst party in Washington history. Alan Greenspan accused me of having a toga party. That's okay. He's no John Belushi. And he turned out to be wrong on everything anyway. I never give parties, and I'm terrible at it. So somehow about 500 people got invited or just crashed. The ones who came fashionably late, like Tom Hanks and Ben Affleck and Bruce Springsteen, and the publisher of the Washington Post and the executive editor of the New York Times, all ended up outside on the street in the freezing cold, unable to get in, with Tom Hanks pathetically yelling for someone to toss a beer out the window. The ones who came unfashionably early, young and thirsty bloggers whom I'd never met, stayed all night guzzling the Grey Goose. But it was such a historic moment that I put aside my disappointment about not getting to meet the boss and Forrest Gump, woke up at 4 a.m. the next day and rounded up my groggy house guests to go down and greet the dawn at my favorite monument in DC, the Lincoln Memorial. We bundled up, took a picnic of croissants and champagne, piled in some taxis, got out in the dark, and started walking up to the moonlit memorial, past the scaffolding where a stage had been built for stars to serenade the president a couple of nights earlier. Suddenly, a slab of a man rose up before me. "The monument is closed," he said. I had never seen the monument closed, and I was confused. "Are you park police?" I asked. "No," he said. "Are you DC police?" "No." "Are you Secret Service?" "No." Finally, he growled at me. "I am Beyoncé security." I protested that while Beyoncé was really talented, she wasn't even there, and she didn't really have the power to close down a national monument. She could put a ring on it, but not a ring around it. But her security guard glowered. My friends glared at me as we trudged back down the hill. I never thought, 5 years later, another twerking diva would once more shut down the Lincoln Memorial. But I underestimated Michelle Bachmann. I wish I could be more of a blithe spirit to a foggy San Francisco, a hopeful emissary bringing sunny news from the nation's capital to give you cheer. Unfortunately, I come as a shivering refugee from what was once, long ago and far away, the greatest democracy on earth. I come tempest-tossed and yearning to breathe free, seeking solace in this beautiful city, on the lam from the apocalyptic terror of Ted Cruz's Thunderdome. How on earth did a Canadian end up nearly destroying America? They're usually so nice. My only theory is that when Ted Cruz started the GOP civil war and led the House Republicans into Pickett's charge on Obamacare, he didn't understand what he was doing. That's American history, after all. They made a deal to reopen the government in the nick of time. Thomas Jefferson's utopia was swiftly devolving into Ted Cruz's dystopia, not only because White House staffers whose government blackberries had been pried out of their hands during the furlough were quickly going insane, and not only because Michelle Obama's untended vegetable garden was overrun with weeds, critters, and an infestation of stink bugs. I was just about ready to utter Homer Simpson's immortal line, "I, for one, welcome our new insect overlords." In the saddest sign of dystopia, it was revealed that the magnificent Capitol dome has thousands of cracks, The place is literally falling apart. It felt very eerie, like we were moments away from Mad Max motorcycle gangs zooming down Pennsylvania Avenue, and Will Smith and Brad Pitt fighting aliens on the mall, and Julian Assange materializing on our TV and iPhones to tell us he was now Big Brother, or Blonde Brother. Things had really gotten to the point where people were starting to miss the good old days when we had duels and crazy British kings. After 9/11, the country went into a crouch, fearful that America could be destroyed from the outside. We didn't understand that the real danger to our democracy would come from the inside and start with a petty fight over a 6-week spending bill that mushroomed out of control. 8 years ago, I wrote a book called Are Men Necessary? I had to admit in the end that the little dears had their occasional uses. But these days, I'm writing about something that really seems to have no utility whatsoever, even though it's as integral to our lives as the opposite sex. Now I have to ask myself, is Washington necessary? Some of you might say, well, it's a necessary evil. But we must also consider the frightening possibility that it's just evil, filled on this Halloween Eve with mummies, zombies, ghouls, shapeshifters, bloodsuckers, backstabbers, and gravestones for gun control, comity, and civility. It's not even Night of the Living Dead. At least George Romero's zombies had some life in them. Chris Christie said if he had to serve in this Senate right now, he would commit Harry In Washington, there's a venerable Halloween tradition of people in town dressing up as characters in stories familiar from the news. I can't wait until all those Capitol Hill staffers in their orange John Boehner masks run into lobbyists costumed as the federal default, the breach debt limit, and the clean CR. A new poll said an astonishing 47% of the public would be happy if every member of Congress was tossed out. What's astonishing is that it's only 47%. In truth, Washington has rarely risen to the sentimental image depicted in Frank Capra movies. As Jimmy Kimmel pleaded last week, we need to keep the government working so they can continue not to do things on our behalf. As the first woman speaker, San Francisco's own Nancy Pelosi had already earned her place in history. But John Boehner's flummoxing around and his inability to get anything done is now making her look like a cross between Tip O'Neill and Sam Rayburn in an Armani suit. At least she knew how to keep her members in line, and she could count. When Ted Cruz returned to San Antonio on Sunday to an 8-minute standing ovation, he told the crowd, after 2 months in Washington, it's great to be back in America. Washington has long been seen as more officious than efficient, kind of like your bloated, slow-moving Uncle Ned who shambles along and spills the gravy on the nice tablecloth at Thanksgiving. But you always know that when you're threatened, Uncle Ned's going to be the first guy there to help you. Now, however, things on the Potomac have deteriorated to the point where Washington is seen as the threat, like that sheriff in Mel Brooks' Blazing Saddles who holds the gun to his own head. The credit agencies and even the staid, boring Federal Reserve said that the government is a danger to itself and to us. I think the highly technical language the economists used was fruit bats engaging in brinksmanship. So how did the seemingly unbreakable marble capital get broken? Indeed, the evening of 9/11, when members of Congress came out on the steps of the Capitol and sang "God Bless America," may have been the last great moment of togetherness. I used to think that Poppy Bush gave his son the presidency to play with, and W broke it. After the dishonest way the country was led into the Iraq War, following the animus caused by how the 2000 election standoff unfolded, with the politicized Supreme Court putting 5 thumbs on the scale, there have been deepening fault lines. Barack Obama's pledge to change the corrosive tone of Washington came true. It is now, sadly, way worse than it was before he was president, and that includes his Democratic predecessor getting impeached. The blue states are bluer, and the red states are redder. His exciting first election, which many believed would be a balm on past divisions, turned out to be more like a bomb, exacerbating those divisions. Sarah Palin, who plays a Klingon to the president's Spock, has been grumbling about Obama risking impeachment. The woman who came out of the wilds of Wasilla, Alaska, with a pot of moose stew made from bullwinkle she shot and dressed, is back in the spotlight. And from my standpoint, I can only say, you betcha. As a columnist in need of colorful copy, I welcome her back with open arms. As we say in journalism, bad for America, good for Maureen. John McCain's Frankenstein now has her own Frankenstein, Ted Cruz, and that unholy pair are infecting politics with a strain of mean-spiritedness. Cruz is now accusing his maker's maker, McCain, of sabotaging the Tea Partiers. Severely mixing his metaphors, he said the Republican senators should have been the cavalry racing in with cannon, not the Air Force bombing their own troops. And Orrin Hatch is accusing the Heritage Foundation, a Republican think tank, of sabotaging the party. When Palin and Cruz had a rally in Washington recently that ended up at the White House, somebody showed up with a Confederate flag, and conservative activist Larry Klayman said Obama should, quote, put the Koran down, unquote. Freedom Watch, the Tea Party group where Klayman works, tried to soften the snark, putting out a press release saying that Klayman had meant that the president metaphorically bows down to Allah. You can't make it up. I've seen a lot of cynical things in Washington, but this may have been the worst. The Republican rebels without a pause, who sparked the government closure, racing down to the World War II memorial to complain about the president putting up his barricades. Sarah Kuda, as Palin was known in high school, true, still has that same strange syntax, which makes her sound oddly like Yoda. Yoda once sagely observed, when 900 years old you reach, look as good you will not. Palin felt that, as she might put it in her inimitable way, dead will Granny be if implemented Obamacare is. She is just as determined as ever to put Obama's presidency before a death panel, and hinted on Facebook last week that she will help mount Tea Party challenges to incumbent Republican establishment lawmakers up in 2014 who do not cherish her dream, the dream of preventing poor people from seeing doctors. She exhorted on Facebook, in essence, rest well tonight, for tomorrow focus we must on House and Senate races. From sea to shining sea, To fight, we've only just begun. A Cruz-aligned group has already moved to knock off Mitch McConnell in Kentucky for figuring out how to reopen the government. One Tea Party congressman from Virginia explained with their typically perverse logic that the huge hit to the economy from the shutdown did not matter because the American Revolution hurt the economy of the colonies, and then America went on to become the greatest nation on earth. Yeah. Republican Tom Coburn put it more succinctly on Meet the Press Sunday. "We didn't do anything except create a big mess in Washington," he said. While the president, distracted by the economic meltdown, wasn't paying close enough attention in the summer of 2009, the Tea Party blossomed, storming town halls with the now classic rallying cry, "Keep your government hands off my Medicare." The deep-seated visceral reaction to President Obama and the health care plan he and Democrats pushed through generated a backlash that put House Republicans in power in 2011, and they've been fighting the White House tooth and nail ever since. We've gotten into this weird cycle where the president was elected with young people and minorities turning out in droves to support him. Then you've got a midterm election where the turnout is lower and a bunch of conservatives get elected to the House and Senate after the Tea Party launches some primaries and attacks on the old line Republicans who were there. Then 2012 rolls around, Obama wins again, House Democrats get 1 million more votes nationwide than Republicans, but Republicans in these specially drawn conservative districts hold on to power. It's a recipe for paralysis. California, which used to be the symbol for paralysis and government dysfunction, fixed it partly by forsaking gerrymandering and having a nonpartisan commission draw the lines of districts. And now the congressional delegation is becoming a truer reflection of the state. But while the California legislature is becoming a breath of fresh air, Cruz and the Cruzettes were holding their breath until the country turned blue, emotionally and politically. Cruz told Fox News after the shutdown that he sees it as a good model going forward to defeat Obamacare and empower Americans. Yes, Americans must feel quite empowered when the economy loses $24 billion because of foolhardy children on a fool's errand, as a fed-up John McCain called it. Literally and understandably, the only part of the economy that did well during the shutdown was an increase in liquor sold in restaurants. And that was mostly thanks to John Boehner. That poor guy needed all the California Merlot he could gulp at night, since he had to spend his days herding cats, as one of his pals in Congress put it. Senator Cruz was elected to Congress in Texas the same year the president got elected, in classic Tea Party fashion. Against all odds, he took on the establishment Republican in a primary in Texas, the man the whole old line party was backing, David Dewhurst, and trounced him with the help of fairy godmother Sarah Palin. As Palin might put it, a missile Cruz will like Washington hit, and coming they will never see it. Cruz never lacked confidence. When he went to Harvard Law School after Princeton, he refused to be in study groups with anyone from what he called the lesser Ivies. Evidently, he didn't realize that people in Harvard and Yale considered Princeton to be a lesser Ivy. Joining libertarian ophthalmologist Rand Paul, Cruz managed in a very short time to turn Washington completely on its head. The Republican Party is now a bizarro world. Everything reels backwards. The party that always worked hand in pocket with lobbyists now hates K Street. The party that always did the bidding of big business and Wall Street didn't seem to give a fig if we had a federal default that would cause the markets to collapse. The party that used to be for fiscal responsibility didn't mind shutting down the government and costing us millions a day, and even wanted to pay federal employees that weren't working. The party that used to be against government programs suddenly found that they couldn't live without food inspectors, the World War II monument, and clean towels in the congressional gym. The party that used to be all about defense allowed a shutdown that blocked death benefits for the families of American troops killed in Afghanistan. Hawks morphed into hippie peaceniks. The chest-thumping party that pushed to go to Iraq and Afghanistan now refused to let President Obama attack Syria over its use of chemical weapons, acting like he was a reckless warmonger. The party of flag-waving patriotism didn't blink an eye at the idea that the world would see us as a deadbeat, the kind of country we typically make fun of when they have economic meltdowns over there somewhere. The Democrats are in bizarro world too. They have been working in unanimity, showing a steel spine, following their leaders. Very strange. Most people saw the hostage action on Obamacare as upsetting every law of political physics. Republican Senator Lamar Alexander said it would be as though Democrats controlled the House and Republicans controlled the Senate and the White House, and then Democrats demanded that you eliminate all anti-labor laws or they would shut down the government. The budget had never been used for this level of legislative extortion before. As Stephen Colbert explained the GOP strategy, the rules are, I go first and I refuse to take my turn, and you can't take yours until I'm done. I know you're upset, but we're both at fault here, so let's negotiate. I agree to take my turn if you agree that I win. Typically, Washington runs on self-promotion, self-preservation, and self-perpetuation. But in this case, Tea Party kamikaze pilots were flying the plane, intent on self-destruction and self-annihilation. Even if the cost was repelling Americans, smearing their brand, and garnering the worst poll numbers in the history of polls. Numbers so abysmal that they were dropping faster than a pig out of a helicopter, as Dan Barry likes to say. They jeopardized their effort to take over the Senate and shook up their allies. Peter King denounced the Tea Partiers as yahoos. Tim Pawlenty said they badly overplayed their hand. Mitch McConnell said that the Tea Party plan was not a smart play. The Koch brothers put out a letter saying that they had never advocated shutting down the government over Obamacare. Jeb Bush, whose brother smashed the family station wagon into the globe, called for the Tea Partiers to show some self-restraint. The one-party elder who gave a shout-out to the shutdown was Dick Cheney. You know you're in trouble when Cheney considers you a positive force for good. Yeah, big trouble. John McCain, who labeled the Tea Partiers wacko birds, had been joking that Republicans were so unpopular, their supporters were down to paid staffers and blood relatives. Until he got a call last week from his 101-year-old mother saying to include her out. And the shutdown probably ensured a Democratic governor in Virginia. The Clinton money guy, Terry McAuliffe, known as the Macker, who was so slippery that the Richmond Times-Dispatch refused to endorse either candidate. So, why on earth would a party light itself on fire? There are a lot of reasons. A lot of the Republican House members represent very conservative districts and are against the old school get along, go along Republicans. There's a part of conservatism that makes you want to think of yourself as the underdog, that you don't mind losing. It shows that you were right and everybody else was wrong. There's the Republican echo chamber, that they listen to Fox News and talk to themselves and read Sarah Palin on Twitter and hear from their conservative constituents and think they're doing the right thing, even though the National Party is in tatters. Lee Atwater and Bush Sr. wanted to create a big tent for Republicans, and W and Jeb courted Latinos and women. But now their party is missing the demographic wave. They're anti-gay marriage, anti-immigration, regressive on women. As Tina Fey said, if I have to listen to one more gray-faced man with a $2 haircut explain to me what rape is, I'm going to lose my mind. Other crazy flaws in the GOP strategy are letting the Democrats look like the reasonable party and overshadowing the huge problems with the rollout of Obamacare. If the crazy Canadian senator had not done a thing, there still might have been a delay in Obamacare just because the crazy Canadian firm that did the website was so inept. Remember that South Park song, Blame Canada? The lyric went, "We must blame them and cause a fuss before someone thinks of blaming us." Why didn't the Obama administration just bring in a bunch of 13-year-olds and a case of Red Bull? Yeah. The Obama campaign transformed politics with its technological sophistication. But Monday, the president was reduced to calling the Geek Squad and hawking an enrollment 1-800 number like that guy pitching Ginzo knives on TV. As the Washington Post Dana Milbank put it. As a public service, that number is 1-800-318-2596. Sorry. Barack Obama and I have always had a very special relationship. Yes, we have. The first time I met him, he took my hand and said, "Stop making fun of my ears." And the strong feelings he had for me only grew from there. Once, when Obama traveled to Europe during the 2008 campaign, I got an interview with him on his plane, Force One. At the end of the interview, he asked if he could talk to me alone for a minute. His press secretaries vanished. I figured now I was really going to get some inside dope, the sort of juicy stuff Scotty Reston or Bob Woodward scored. I was sitting on the edge of my seat. Obama looked at me somberly, his brown eyes locking into my brown eyes. "You are really irritating," he said. Yeah. While I looked at him stricken, he repeated it. I was upset afterwards, but then I decided that Barack Obama was simply proud, like Mr. Darcy in Pride and Prejudice. He would figure out that I was likable enough. And sure enough, when he became president, his favorite journalist became a New York Times columnist, David Brooks. Mr. Darcy and David Brooks. It just doesn't have much of a ring to it. The president is self-contained, but he's also very sensitive. With Dick Cheney, you could write anything about him. I dubbed him Darth Vader, and he began calling himself that. He called himself that on 60 Minutes Sunday. He's sort of proud of it. I wrote that he had a room in the White House basement with pentagrams where he spoke an ancient language and made love to a goat devil. He was fine with it. But President Obama gets annoyed. Once, a few years ago, I was giving a speech in New York talking about why I had nicknamed the president Spock, when I looked out in the audience and saw Leonard Nimoy gazing at me. I was terrified it was going to be like that scene in Annie Hall when a pompous man is proselytizing about Marshall McLuhan, and Marshall McLuhan walks up and tells him, "You don't understand my work at all." I was afraid Spock would spook me. He didn't do it, but it happened with George Lucas, who actually made it inside to my inaugural party. I was so thrilled to meet the Star Wars director until he began chiding me. "Dick Cheney is not Darth Vader," he said. My heart sank. But then Lucas went on. "W is Darth Vader. Dick Cheney is the Emperor." My main critique of Barack Obama as president is that he's like Luke Skywalker. He has the Force, he just doesn't always know how to channel it. There was a rare bipartisan consensus in Washington last week about how the president needs to engage more. Dianne Feinstein, John McCain, David Axelrod, and others said that the president, who conceded himself he was a drive-by senator, will need to finally learn how to work Capitol Hill, use the velvet glove and the velvet hammer, if he's going to lead Washington out of a crisis mentality. Leon Panetta, a former Democratic member of Congress who served in Washington with 9 presidents and worked as Bill Clinton's chief of staff, put it best, I think. Quote, "The president," he said, "is extremely bright, he's extremely able, he's somebody who I think certainly understands the issues, asks the right questions, and I think has the right instincts about what needs to be done for the country. But you have to engage in the process," he said. "This is a town where it's not enough to feel you have the right answer. You've got to roll up your sleeves, and you've got to really engage in the process. That's what governing is all about." Barack Hussein Obama was a brilliant enough politician to defy the odds and sell himself to the American people when his first name rhymed with the country we went to war with. His second name was the same as a dictator we went to war with twice, and his third name was nearly the same as the terrorists we were at war with. But oddly enough, he doesn't care much for politics, as it turned out, and didn't like to sell his agenda or leverage power or ply his charms and that killer smile. It's funny. There's a top woman lawmaker in Congress who used to call me when Bill Clinton was president to tell me plaintively that if Bill could just stop seducing in the White House, their party could accomplish so much. Recently, she invited me over to her house for a drink to tell me plaintively that if Barack could just start seducing in the White House, their party could accomplish so much. This time, of course, she meant political seduction. As Neera Tanden, the president of the Center for American Progress and a former advisor to both Hillary Clinton and Obama, told New York Magazine, "The truth is, Obama doesn't call anyone, and he's not close to almost anyone. It's stunning that he's in politics because he really doesn't like people. My analogy is that it's like becoming Bill Gates without liking computers." That's Neera talking. I've watched the transformation of Jerry Brown from Governor Moonbeam to Governor Laserbeam. So I know that politicians can learn to roll up their sleeves with legislatures if they really try. One of my favorite all-time political stories was when I chronicled Brown's habit, when he ran for president in 1992, of spending the night with supporters instead of at hotels to underscore the grassroots nature of his campaign. It was like the ransom of Red Chief for Home Alone. He would take over the master bedroom, leave crumpled wet towels and half-made beds in his wake, tell his hosts they should give up smoking, get grumpy if grannies asked to have their picture taken with him. But the Iceman melteth. Brown, who was a tear-it-apart precursor to the Tea Party, decided to stop rebelling against the legacy of his gregarious dad and get off the warpath and be constructive. He even began using his loft to have Democrats from the coastal areas and Republicans from the mountains over for California wine and wooing, trying to create enough conviviality, as he put it to me, to mush it together to get enough votes. We'll see if President Obama starts serving wine and cheese and conviviality. Speaking of habits and Governor Brown, in a speech in Washington today, he struggled with the name of the conservative brothers behind the Tea Party movement, first calling them the Koch brothers before correcting himself. This is what he said. Coke in California means something else. Gotta love that guy. We'll learn soon if Washington can become necessary again, or if our dyspeptic, dysfunctional dystopia is the new normal. Meanwhile, back on the topic of are men necessary, and since this is the JCC, I would just like to confide in you guys that I have left 2 notes at the Western Wall. One when I went with W, and one when I went with Barack Obama. Very polite little notes, asking for a Jewish husband. But Bupkis has happened, and that's Meshuggah. If nothing happens soon, I might have to write a sequel called Are Walls Necessary? Thank you, guys. You're an amazing audience.
Maureen.
He's not yanking me off stage.
Okay, that's it.
This is my friend Carl Hulse, who is our Washington editor, and he came along as a special treat because I figured this is going to be a super savvy audience. And I wanted you to have all the dirt that's going on in Washington. And Carl is so knowledgeable about Capitol Hill that President Obama lures him over to the White House to watch football so he can pick his brain. And Nancy Pelosi is constantly giving him lectures about how the New York Times should give her very special treatment because she loves the Times. And so he knows all. So if you have any substantive questions,
Maureen,
he's here. And if you have any non-substantive questions, I'm here.
our first question is right here.
Since I'm on the other side of the wall, I don't know where she gets her opinions, and I have nothing to do with any of them. So
Yeah.
I'll answer slightly differently.
Yes. He's a real journalist.
Our first question is right here in the middle. Right here, Maureen. I'm waving to you.
Oh, sorry. Oh. Okay.
As a great fan of yours and a terrific lecture, unlike your speech tonight, I find your columns not only interesting, but I wonder why you often do a character assassination as part of the column.
I don't really feel like it's character assassination as much as it is my civic duty.
Next question is up here. Maureen, up to your right in the back.
Okay.
Hi, Maureen. Thanks so much for being here. I'm a big fan of your column. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your experience writing for the New York Times, and specifically, maybe you could touch on the lack of gender and ethnic diversity among the columnists and how that affects you in the newspaper.
Well, let's see. We have the amazing Gail Collins, and I was hired by the amazing Anna Quinlan, and my friend, the amazing Jill Abramson, is now the first female executive editor at the Times. So it's a work in progress. We're doing better than Saudi Arabia.
The next question is up here to your left.
Hi, Maureen. Thank you for being here. I love your column. I'd like to ask what opinions or outlook you have on possibly taking back the House for the Democratic majority.
And that's where we're going to let Carl take the microphone.
I would say right now that that is still a fairly big uphill climb for the Democrats. I think that they are feeling quite a bit better after the shutdown. They've got some recruits in places they weren't supposed to get, some including a new one in Nebraska. I think that it's still, though, because of the environment, off-year election, and the fact that the districts just were redrawn, it's hard to get seats in play, and I think they would say that too. I do think that there's a shot. I think it's going to be hard. I think actually the biggest political consequence of the fallout is really going to be in the Senate races next year. The Republicans came into this year with a pretty good chance of taking over the Senate. The races are in the right places for them, places and where there's some retirements in places like Montana. They thought they had a good shot, and I think this is going to make it harder for them. A lot of their candidates in Senate races are House members, and House members who were involved in a lot of the Tea Party stuff in Georgia, in Montana, in Arkansas. So I think that the House would be tough, though it's not 100% out of reach, but I think the Senate has become much more difficult for them.
Next question is up here in the back to your right.
Hi, thank you so much. I've been thinking recently about how back in the day there were 3 major networks that were attempting to give unbiased news, and we all had somewhat of a shared experience. And now news is totally fragmented. You have your own homepage, your own news feed. How does that play into establishing any kind of dialogue or compromise or moving forward?
You want to go first?
That was a great question, so I'm going to let him take it.
I think both Maureen and I have been in this business a long time, and it's just changed so dramatically from when we started. It's a totally different business, and it actually changes almost by the month now, and we're trying to figure out how to keep up. I think that what you're talking about has had a big impact on the political discourse in this country, where everyone does have sort of their own network and where they go and their own Twitter feeds that they follow. And I think it's been part of the problem with reaching compromise and trying to get along in Congress and in Washington, because, and we're part of this too, obviously, you're rewarded for being outlandish in some ways. That's the way to break through the media clutter. And so I think that, I think that there's some real negative consequences to it, and it's hard for people to listen to the other side. I mean, the election night with Fox News was the classic, right, with Karl Rove, and then even Fox News the next day, I think, didn't Roger Ailes later say maybe we should tone this down a bit? We're starting to, people were feeding into the narrative so much that people aren't actually contemplating an alternative.
And you're in trouble when Roger Ailes wants to tone it down.
The next question's right here in the middle.
As recently as last week when Larry Klayman, as you mentioned, inserted the concept of Obama's otherness and the birther issue. Can we look forward to the same type of drumbeat from the Republicans if Ted Cruz, who has clearly now inserted himself into the presidential race, if he does indeed run for it? Can we look forward to hearing a lot of birther commentary about Ted Cruz, who was born in Canada, clearly?
Well, Carl has actually covered Ted Cruz and knows him. I haven't had the pleasure yet, although I intend to have it very soon. So I'd be interested to know what you think.
You know, you raise a good point. I actually know a little bit about this because before even the Obama birther issue came out, I wrote a story about the fact that John McCain was born in the Panama Canal Zone during the campaign, and just sort of toying with this issue of natural-born citizen and how there's never been an actual constitutional decision on it and what that means and how fluid it is. For when I was growing up, and probably a lot of you, it was assumed that that meant you had to be born in the United States. It didn't have to do so much with your birth parent. And then you have this weird Cruz aspect where he was still a citizen of Canada and then renounced his citizenship. I'm not sure it's going to be a major problem for him, but I do think it would come up a lot, and I think there would probably be a challenge to him if he did run. It's the Supreme Court has never actually decided this. It's an open question, so who knows? But I think you'd hear about it, yeah. From the Republicans? No. Oh, actually, in the primary, he might. You know, if somebody's trying to knock him out, if he's getting too far, I could see that, but it would be in that context.
Next one is up here, to your right.
In 2007, that other genius, Chris Matthews, came out here and predicted that by February 2008, Hillary Clinton would have wrapped up the Democratic nomination and would be jeopardized because the Republicans would have all those months in which she was sitting there as the lone Democratic nominee to be their target. As usual, Chris Matthews, certain but wrong. Question, if in fact Hillary Clinton is not the nominee of the Democratic Party, could you just perhaps just indicate your thoughts about the other possibilities that the Democrats might have in the 2016 election for president?
You start, and I'll jump in. You start.
I think Martin O'Malley is seen as a possible candidate. I think that there's people that we don't even know. I think John Hickenlooper of Colorado is seen as a possible candidate, comes from a good place in the country for this. I think that Mark Warner, who was interested before, would probably get a mention. I think people talk about the potential of someone both Maureen and I know very well, Rahm Emanuel, running for president, but we both would rule that out entirely. Who else do you have?
Did you mention Chris?
Who? He was talking Democrats.
Oh, Democrats, right. I don't know. I was just going to say, well, Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren, people mentioned as a...
You like Elizabeth Warren?
Obviously would do well with this crowd. Yeah, I think that people see her as a possible candidate.
I was just going to say on the subject of Hillary that, you know, it's just weird to watch because people like David Axelrod are really puzzled about why she didn't do what she said she was going to do and sort of go off for a while and let us miss her. What is that country song, We Can't Miss You If You Don't Go Away or something? And they've rolled out Chelsea as a future candidate. And, you know, the problem is that it just, you know, with the Terry McAuliffe, also Hillary campaigning for Terry McAuliffe, that reminds you of all the money problems in selling the White House, like 1600 Pennsylvania Motel. And then, you know, Chelsea, with this big rollout of a possible political career, reminds you that we might just go back to trading off between Bushes and Clintons for the rest of time until the apocalypse. I mean, basically, there was a Bush or Clinton for, what, 28 years in the White House, and then they would keep going with George P. Bush and Jenna Bush and Chelsea for a couple terms. And so I'm not sure it helps Hillary to have this big rollout of Chelsea right now because it just reminds you, although we do love to hear about the British royal family and the baby and everything, do we really just want 2 royal families in the country? I don't know.
But we take no responsibility for Chris Matthews' predictions. So.
No, we do not. None.
The next question's here in the middle to your left.
Hello, Maureen. I purchased your book, Are Men Necessary? Just striking. And I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you.
This is on a lighter note, superficial kind of question. Do you watch the show House of Cards? And do you like it?
Yeah, I binge watched it, and I watched about 8 episodes, and I thought it was fun. Have you seen that?
I actually watched the British one, and
I watched the British one.
People are shocked that I've never watched it because I was the chief congressional correspondent, and I just haven't seen it. The British one was awesome. If you've seen that, it was really a tremendous show. I've heard this is good, but all these things, it's not like that, right? So, I mean, in fact, Obama's big line about this has all been he wishes he had someone like Kevin Spacey to work
that's
with.
what he says.
Right?
Yeah, that's what he says. If only I had someone like that to work with. Yeah.
He can get stuff done.
Yeah.
But,
Next question is all the way up here in the back.
Yeah, I also really like House of Cards, though I read some columnists was referring to it as the House of Turds for current Congress.
No, that was the New York Daily News, right? Yeah, it was the cover. Yeah.
So Dick Armey and the people who kind of gave rise to the Tea Party, grassroots as it supposedly is, seem to have tapped into a lot of reaction to the trends the sort of demographic trends, the social trends in America for gay marriage, for minorities taking a bigger and bigger play in the country's discourse. Apart from aging and dying, are there forces that you see that will kind of move people who are embracing the Tea Party to start looking at a more open view of politics?
No. I mean, you're talking about people who are totally committed to their ideology, much more so than you would see normally. And I think that, and that gets to the part of who do they feel singed by the shutdown, right? Well, a lot of the Republicans on Capitol Hill do, and I think that you've heard Mitch McConnell and others say there won't be another shutdown. But there are elements of the Tea Party, and Ted Cruz, as Maureen referenced in her speech, who still think that they won in some respects. So I think that for people like Steve King, Louis Gohmert, Michelle Bachmann, who's not running again, that no, this is to them. This is a fight to preserve what they see as the America that is changing faster than they want it to do and going away. I don't see that for the really hardcore part here. I don't see that changing. Do you?
No. No.
The next question's here in the middle.
Great. So, first of all, Maureen, I want to say that you're looking great in that dress. That, yeah.
Well, I want to say that was my favorite question.
Yeah, and but another question. Say, do I hear a third? Do I hear a fourth? Yeah. No. The real question that I have in mind is the Republican Party aware that they're doing a lot to self-destruct? I mean, I'm talking about the ones who are really thinking about it, not worrying about re-election. The people who really are thinkers in the Republican Party, which I think are a lot of people in that party that are thinkers, and you talk to them. So what do they think?
Yeah, I was born in Washington. I grew up there, and none of us have ever seen anything like this. It's just, as I said, it defies the laws of political physics. It just isn't how the town, has ever operated. I mean, what do you think?
I mean, we had a Sunday Times. Hopefully you all buy the print edition and read it online. But a big front page story Sunday about what we're calling a civil war in the Republican Party. It's out in the open. I actually wrote the story that ran in the paper the day of after Election Day when Obama was reelected, saying there's going to be a really big fight in the Republican Party now for what its identity is, and the party has gone so far to the right, it's going to be hard to course correct. I think that's proven out. But what you do see now are the business interests getting extremely nervous. This is real economic disruption as far as they see it, and they're already starting to form PACs and try and recruit candidates, Republican candidates, to challenge some of the Tea Party aligned folks in primaries, sort of the reverse of how the Tea Party's been engineering it. So I mean, I think that there's a lot of people at the high levels of the party in Washington who both publicly and privately think this was just a giant disaster and they've got to get it fixed. And you know, they have other problems too, because it's not just this, it's immigration, right? This is a terrific problem for them in a lot of states. Now in certain parts of the country, they don't see the need to move on immigration, but I know that there's a lot of Republicans in California who are worried about where the party's going on this. But I think this is going to be a huge fight, and it's going to play out for the next 2 election cycles in a major way, which is, as Maureen said, bad for America maybe, but
good for us.
We have another question here to your right.
First, I second the dress. And to what degree do you think the antipathy against the White House has racial overtones, or is that a non-starter?
No, I said in a column that for some of the extreme critics of Obama, his real crime is presiding while black. And I do definitely think there are racial overtones. They had a Confederate flag on the White House lawn last week. I mean, who could have imagined that,
I think there was a lot of Republicans of the kind that were involved in the Civil War were very unhappy with that Confederate flag out there. But
I mean, what do you think there are racial overtones?
I don't have an opinion on that.
Oh, yes. He's not allowed to state his opinion.
The next question's up here to the left.
Hi, Maureen. Thanks very much for the speech. Lots of laughs. I wonder if you could give us a breakdown in your own unique personal style as a national candidate, Mr. Chris Christie.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I can see both sides of him. I can... No, I can see the appealing part of Christie, and, when he worked with President Obama on Sandy, that is what the country is craving. They're craving people who work together, and, he's funny and kind of, I don't know how real he is, you can tell with politicians, but he seems, like a real guy. But on the other hand, he got in some scrap, or he was on a sports radio show talking, he's friends with the Jets coach who gave him the advice about his, weight loss surgery. And he, there had been a New York Daily News Jets reporter who was critical of the coach, and Christie just took off on him in a really unpleasant way, talking about why should they listen to him? He was underpaid, and he was an idiot, and he can so easily kind of go over the line from sort of colorful, engaging guy to sort of real jerk. So, and campaigns are hugely stressful. So it's just hard to say. I know that, some Obama people, maybe because most Obama people are so thin, think that Christie's weight is more than a health problem, that it's a discipline problem, so he wouldn't have the discipline to go the distance. But I don't know, it could go either way in a campaign,
We'll take 2 more questions.
Next one is over here.
Hi, Maureen. Your prescription for the president is to engage more and work more with the Republicans. If they won't work with the Chamber of Commerce, what leads you to think they'd work with the president?
I think he has, you know, the most nihilistic, destructive, you know, group of people to work with in the history of America. But I also think that, you know, when Democrats and people close to him and around him are begging him to try and engage more and not, like, you know, in this last case, leave it all to Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi. I just think he, you know, I called him in a column recently, you know, Sir Lecture a lot. I mean, they just feel that he comes down from the mountain and lectures them, and he can be an enormously charming guy when he wants to, and I just never understand why he doesn't try and use more of his skill set. You know, he said that Bill Clinton should be Secretary of Explaining Stuff and wanted Bill Clinton to explain his own health care plan, you know, but he doesn't like, he's really repelled at the idea of selling. He doesn't want to sell stuff. You know, he doesn't want to explain stuff. You know, so many people didn't even understand what healthcare was the day it went into action because it wasn't explained, and yet this is one of the most, you know, brilliant guys with words that we've ever seen in politics. So it's just strange in a way that we elect presidents, you know, to a large degree if there's somebody we want to see on TV every day, you know, and they always have the thing, who do you want to choose your pizza topping? And yet, so W and Obama had people skills that their opponents didn't have, and yet both of them turned out to be introverts, which is just a strange situation.
Here's our last question.
Thank you for the New York Times and for coming today. I, for one, hope the physical Sunday New York Times never goes away. Absolutely love it. Two major issues are happening now in the country, just to name a few. The economy, with the change with Janet Yellen, and the Obamacare. And with you two, fingers on the pulse in Washington, kind of what is your feeling of the outcome of both of those issues?
I think Yellen, I mean, that was a great inside story going on here and had a lot to do with California, right? And the lobbying campaign on her behalf. I think that people think she is going to be pretty easily confirmed. There doesn't seem to be any trouble right now with her. The only guy who's been making any sort of noise about it at all has been Rand Paul, who's against the Federal Reserve. So, so I think that the thought on that, if you really want to get down to the weeds, is that, you know, that she'll continue the stimulus, and they're hoping that. I think that part of the reason that they actually moved forward with her during the recent troubles was that to sort of reassure people, right, that they were still making their moves okay, and the economy, any efforts to correct it were going to continue. On Obamacare, as we all call it now, I think they're in a world of hurt right now, right? This is, the Republicans totally stepped on their best chance ever to derail this thing. But now the full focus is turned back towards it, right? And they need to get these computer issues fixed. Now, I was talking to somebody who talked to the president. They think they can get it done and that it's fixable. And it may be. Maybe it is just a technological issue. But I think that it needs to be corrected very quickly or it's going to get away from them. I think they really need to bear down on that.
I would like to thank you guys. You were an amazing, amazing audience. And go forth and look for my Jewish husband, please.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Maureen, so very much. It's a pleasure.